want to bring Zoe here if she has any specific question regarding that, because she has been working essentially on Varna Vyavastha for past 2 months. So Zoe, any question?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So my question is, having read Manusmriti, most part of it, and having been through the entire text in general, I realized that in the very second verse of this text, it is mentioned that Manu is asked to explain dharma according to the Varna system. So I wanted to ask what is the structure and what are the peculiarities of this Varna system when it comes to Manusmriti, specifically with regards to Manusmriti?
Okay, yeah. Uh, Basically, what the rishis ask is not to explain according to Varna system. System is the key here, but to explain the duties of people belonging to all the four Varnas, as well as those who do not belong to four Varnas, those who are antarprabhavas, which are basically a reference to those who have mixed Varna Swabhavas. Varna Swabhava means for those whose characteristics, whose deeper personality traits are mixture of say Brahmana and Kshatriya, Brahmana and Vaishya, Brahmana, Shudra, or any other combinations, which are usually called as Varna Shankara Jati. So this is how, I mean, it is not that they are asking to explain something according to a particular system, but basically the question is about explaining the teachings of dharma as relevant to different varnas or people having different swabhavas. So this gives us very important insights. One, when we analyze the human society, there are different ways. You have to always use different models, different frameworks to analyze it. I mean, in today's time, for example, we often accept certain things as valid. Okay, we in conversations in newspapers everywhere, we speak about middle class, higher middle class, the the middle class or upper middle class, and then the low income class, below poverty line, and then the very rich, super rich, and we have all these terms like high network clients, individuals, and so HNIs and so on. So that is a framework, right? You are classifying people based on their income, and then you are saying that look, for below poverty line people, we have to do this, and all their condition is this you are discussing. And for middle class, we give tax breaks, this and that. So this is basically a model, and based on that, certain things follow, certain prescriptions, certain prohibitions, certain laws, and so on. And in the past, in outside India also, we will see that certain places you have this notion of aristocracy and the commoners, and in Plato and all, we see such a division as well. So what the division that Manu is giving is basically a classification of people, an identification and classification of people based on something called as Varna Swabhava. Varna, when it is said, it is Varna Swabhava, a deeper personality which is called as Varna. Varna comes from the root Dhatu Vru, which has many meanings, including Vrunoti or to choose, Varna as in color. It's a reference to the gunas. It is a reference to the deeper personality. I say Varna is about deeper personality, for the lack of better translation. It is about deeper swabhava of a person. And if you go into Bhagavad Gita and the commentaries, see, because the real juice is in the commentaries, be it Bhagavad Gita or be it Manusmriti, we have to study the commentaries to understand the real juice of it. And if you go to Bhagavad Gita commentary, Shankaracharya says how a Brahmana has the particular combination of gunas. There is a predominance of sattva, and second predominant is rajas, but the sattva is the most important, and tamas is most less. And in the case of Kshatriya, sattva and rajas are predominant, but rajas is more predominant than sattva, and tamas is again less. In the case of a Vaishya, rajas and tamas is predominant, but rajas is more predominant than tamas. In the case of with Shudra, tamas and rajas is predominant, sattva is less, but it is there, it is less, but tamas is more predominant. So this is not, and this is basically about the guna composition of a person, that is swabha, which determines the swabha. And in our society, for the last, except for the last 200 years, for the last many thousand years, we had a jati setup wherein basically our profession, everything was determined uh, by our jati, by our birth. Now it is, whether it was good or not is completely different discussion. And what jatis we have, 1600 plus jatis, that's also a different discussion. But but basically what has happened, we had so many jatis that came under the Brahmana Varna, that came many other jatis that came under Kshatriya Varna, that many jatis that came under Vaishya Varna, that many that came under Shudra Varna. There are also a lot of movement, many Kshatriya Varnas became Shudra Varna. So a lot of things has happened, and there is no single narrative that can capture everything of it. But basically, for example, if you are a Brahmana, then you, by your family tradition, you know your Gotra Rishi, you have received certain practices from your ancestors, family, father to son, or like that. So you practice those practices. And this is true for every jat, irrespective of what the Shastras. Now, needed. We have to understand, we have to approach this with the hermeneutics of respect, that is Shraddha. That these are the great ancestors, the great rishis, the great gurus they have given us, and it is for our benefit they have given us. Let us study with Shraddha. Let us understand, try to understand it, what it says, rather than what we want it to say, and try to implement whatever is possible. If something does not appear right to us, let us not implement it. If something does not, we cannot understand it, let us keep it aside for a moment. Maybe we will understand it in future. But let us take whatever is beneficial and practice it to the best of our ability. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, even a little bit of practice of dharma keeps fear away. That is, it is very useful, it is auspicious, it gives good fruit.
Of Varna, I had another question, especially in the section of Manusmriti where punishments are discussed. As you explained right now, it is quite possible that Manusmriti has been interpolated at multiple instances, and what we have today is not the original text. But regardless of that, it is we can see that there are many crimes and many punishments discussed in this text, and the punishments that are given are often on the basis of varna. Like the same crime is treated differently when it comes to different communities. Like you mentioned that community based laws were may have been used back then. So what is the like justification, or what were the basis of these kind of reasons of these kind of separation of punishments on the basis of communities?
Yeah. First, I would like to clarify that I did not use the term interpolation. I have a serious objection to the word interpolation because that has a negative connotation. It does not matter that we do not have the so-called original text of Manusmriti, because it was an oral tradition. Manu did not write down the text necessarily. He would have given an oral. So it does not matter whether it is available to us or not. What is matter is what is available to us is the sum and bonum, the summary, the concise format of what is the teaching of that school of thought. And that is all that is matters to us. So this interpolation is a very problematic game that is introduced to dismantle Hindu text. It is a game to dismantle Hindu text, because they will say you don't like particular portion of this text, say it is interpolated. You do not like that portion of another text, you say it is interpolated. So what if there is one book there is called Vishuddha Manusmriti by some person in Arya Samaj who says that 1500 plus verses from Manusmriti is interpolated. All this is mere speculation. Where is the proof that it is interpolated? All the manuscript evidence that we have, which is an objective criteria, says that what we have received is more or less is what has been there in the manuscript format for the last 2500 years. The commentary tradition says that whatever we have is what was there. Maybe changes here and there. Of course, through a long transmission, some things get added, some things get deleted. But it does not change the entirety of teaching, first. And even if we say that beyond the manuscript evidence, there may be certain things that were added at a certain point of time. First of all, there is no way to actually point out which was added, which was not added. Because all that are basically speculations. In academic terms, this is called as higher criticism, which is basically speculation based on, some people say that Bhagavad Gita was written in 10 layers. These are Western scholars are there. You read, please read Dr. Vishwa Luri's work on Bhagavad Gita. There are different scholars who say there are Sankhya layer, Vedanta layer, Yoga layer, this layer, that layer, which were all added at different points of time. And so what we say that Gita is a complete text, is a comprehensive in its own way, but they say, no, these are, we have to chop it off. We have to do a autopsy of that Gita. So those who do this interpolation thing with Manusmriti, they are doing the same autopsy with Manusmriti also. So let us not see it as interpolation, see it as this, that there is a school of thought which has received certain knowledge and which has developed upon certain knowledge and which has come up with a text in a concise format of that. In concise, we include the entirety of teachings of the school. So that is how we should approach it. And now on the question of Varna and discrimination and all, here in the case of Varna Vyavastha, there is a normative assumption that all legal and social and everything, every aspect of life has to be on a egalitarian sense. But this normative assumption has a basis of history of not more than 200 or 300 years. Its root lies in Enlightenment ideology of the Western culture. Enlightenment period and all this. So this is actually product of colonialism. I'm not debating whether it is right or not. That is a different, completely altogether different debate. But I'm saying that the expectation that our ancient society has to be in the mold of what we consider as good today, that expectation is wrong. So instead of considering it, the different prescriptions as discriminatory, why not see it as discretionary? Taking it into account the diversity of communities, the diversity of people and diversity of their different capabilities, competencies, and their functions in the society. As far as punishments is concerned, yes, there are distinct kind of punishments given to different people in different circumstances. Agree. But it does not necessarily mean oppression. Not always. You say severe punishment. Actually, the severe punishment was the norm in all ancient India. Manu says, if you violate a Kanya woman and your hands are cut, your fingers are cut, if you violate with a finger. That's a severe punishment. Nobody gives today. But that punishment is not based on Varna per se. That was based on the woman is being violated there. The point is, yes, in certain situations, the Varna-based punishments are given. Yes, it is debatable. We can definitely debate whether it is applicable to in today's situation or not. Especially today, we have, see, the Manusmriti speaks about 4 Jajar Varnas. It speaks about certain Shankara Jatis in the chapter 10th, I think, right? It speaks about Suta and other. But when we speak today of the castes or Jatis, do we have the same designation Jatis? No. We have scheduled castes, we have Dalits. The terminology Dalit or scheduled castes have no meaning as far as Shastric discourse is concerned. And we have 1,600 or 2,000 Jatis today. We do not find any mention in the Shastras, in the original, the source Shastras, right? Why? Because these Jatis have a different origin. They are based on certain kulas, certain family traditions, certain professions, the trade guilds, all formed a community which is called as Jati. But somebody is doing pottery work, he belongs to the Jati of pottery making work. Somebody doing, so that was how the traditional system was arranged. It's a different issue on the ground. There have been instances of injustice. There may have been instances of discrimination, so to speak. There is no denial of that. But to attribute every and each those instances to the Shastras is problematic. Shastra says something, something on the ground may appear to be similar to that, but the basis may be completely different, completely distinct. So we have to be very open-minded when we study the Shastras. I'm not saying everything has to be accepted. See, the Shastra has three parts: Achara, Vyavahara, and Prashchita. The Achara and Prashchita has a Vedic basis because they speak about actions which are leads to punya, actions which leads to papa. But Vyavahara, the legal jurisprudence, they speak about basically they have the phala is drishta phala, that is visible fruits. That is, if there is a crime, a proper punishment is to be given such that it acts as a example that others do not commit that crime, and one who has committed that crime is also given proportional punishment. Now this is the basic funda. So now you see the Manusmriti, it speaks about certain kind of punishments for certain kind of crimes. There is Mahapatakas, Patakas, and all the classification. Now you say, in our current society, fine, I cannot put in that kind of punishments, but I get a knowledge that these kind of crimes have this degree of punishment has to be given. The magnitude has to be this much. So I can design a different punishment in a similar magnitude to capture that, right? This is possible. You say, fine, today, see, society, the Varnashrama system in society is not there. The Jati system is hardly there. Fine. So in the Vyavahara and punishments, you cannot give a punishment based on Varnashrama. Fine. That is all not needed also, you can assume, fine. But still you can make use of the principles in the Vyavahara, that principles like stealing is wrong and these things, what kind of relative magnitude of different crimes, and use that in your own articulation of the problem. Right? There are multiple ways we can make the Dharma Shastras relevant today. We can derive values, we can derive principles from it that making relevant today. See, the fundamental mistake we are all making when we approach the Shastra is we are approaching it as a document of history. Does it tell what happened 2000 years ago? That is not the prayojana of the text. If we approach the text in that way, we are actually subverting the prayojana of the text. What is the prayojana of the text? Did the sages approach the Manu in the first 4 verses that you studied, asking, "Oh Manu Mahabhav, please tell us what was the duties of these 4 varnas in 2000 years before your time? Or when Brahmaji gave this in the origin of creation, what was it?" They do not ask this, right? There is no historical question, purely a philosophical question. And philosophy is eternal. That is why Dharma is Sanatana. So, when we read the text, we have to read it for what the prayojana it is given. The prayojana is to make the teachings are relevant to guide us here and now today, but what actions lead to punya, what actions lead to papa, and how we can lead a more harmonious, more meaningful life in the society as a whole. And towards that end, we can make use of all the texts in whatever way we can to create an in-depth drishti of the things. Today, take the example of abortion. You are aware of the 2 camps there, especially in US, but also in India. The pro-life camp, the pro-abortion, the pro-choice camp. This debate, there is a middle ground. I have written on this as well, which is provided by the dharmic way, wherein it upholds the importance of life, but also recognizes certain inevitable situations where abortion could be an inevitable option. So the dharmic drishti is missing, but in the debate, dharmic drishti is there. There is no pro-dharma camp. So we need to bring in, if we are to say, we have to build that we are independent, we are India, we are rooted in our own drishti and our own worldview, in Indic way of life we have to design. So the purpose is not to go in the past, but to build a future based on our own drishti. Then we have to study Dharma Shastra, because without Dharma Shastra, what is Dharma? Dharma cannot be discussed without Dharma Shastra. We cannot speak about socio-cultural issues, even legal issues, in any from a Indic perspective, from a dharmic perspective, from an Indic drishti, without taking refuge in Dharma Shastras, without reviving this Dharma system, this tradition of Dharma Shastra, debate and discussion and applying these principles to today's issues, that has to be done.
Yeah, I think one point that has emphatically come out is that it's not easy to approach this text unless you sort of have more nuanced understanding and sort of keep your prejudices also away. And another important thing is that Shastras are, if I'm not wrong, they are just guiding light. It doesn't have, and after all, it's your individual conscience, vivek, that ultimately decides what you have to do. I think it was really insightful discussing with you, Nitin, today. I'm sure all of us would have liked it. Before we actually part, I just want to make one point, and which I think can sum up what you've said so far, is that all this, whether it is Manusmriti or any other Smriti or any other Shastra, I think what is important is that they guide us in some way. And also the Shastra, our own Shastras, give us freedom to choose what we should take, what we should not take. And that freedom is equally important, and taking the guidance from this Shastra will eventually help us lead. But our conscience, our vivek should at any time should be alive, and that should also guide us. And hope this discussion would have helped all of us to at least make an attempt to study these texts. Probably there will be more discussions, more debates, and from these debates there will be some perspective that will emerge. The purpose of this discussion was was just to bring out perspectives, or to bring to light some of the ideas which are prevalent there. Also to discuss something which are tricky, discuss something which are often source of criticism, but sometimes the criticism may not necessarily be informed one. So even to have an informed criticism, we may have to make an effort to understand what the text is. And even to follow it, we have to understand what the basics are. So I think this was an effort to move towards basics. I understand the limitation of time, and the basics of such a vast text is very difficult. I'm sure we'll have some more such discussions. But nonetheless, thank you, Nitin, for taking out time. It was really exhaustive, and I'm sure all of us would have benefited from whatever we discussed today.
Thank you, Akshayji. I'm glad to be here. I think we went much beyond the designated time.
No, I think that's one of the things with because the expanse is so much, it's difficult to confine it in the time that we have it. But I don't think there were any regrets on that account. Whatever we discussed should be guiding light for what we are going to do henceforth. So thank you once again, and thank you all of you for joining us. We will keep having more and more such discussions. To know more about us, please visit our website. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be having more such discussions. If you have any suggestions about topics, you can please post it in the comments. Please tell us what you feel about whatever we discussed today. Please tell us more if you think that whatever we did probably was not right, or if you think there is something that we should improve on, because that is what is the idea of all this discussion, is to know where we are also going wrong. So please feel free to write that also. And we will come back with more and keep tuning us to understand India in a better way. So thank you.